what is it? The Wellbeing Show, isn't it? That's right. Seriously, I'm just like, I'll give up. I've failed at the first hurdle. Anyway, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel, and we've got a fantastic returnee, George Twamley. I'm always surprised when people return because it means that obviously it wasn't as horrific as I think it is.
Not at all.
That people are willing to come back. So we'll have a chat with George in a minute. Just to say, though, that this is your final opportunity to be rude live, because this will be the last time we do live. We're going to pre-record in future. So Georgie is our last live guest. So you're welcome to join in. The number's +44 7506 319 745. Send me a WhatsApp message. If you've got questions or comments or thoughts that you want to add in. We're live at the moment on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. And James, if he manages to remain awake for the show, which is quite a big thing. I mean, it's way past his bedtime. He's only 12. He's normally tucked up in bed at this time. And but if he manages to stay awake, he'll sort of have a look at some of your messages and share them with me. All of that said, let's say hello, Georgie. How you doing?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, and to James for
he's probably fallen asleep by now. He's probably
asleep
asleep by now. Sort of, he's got his dummy in somewhere and just sort of tucked up with his teddy. So I've heard you've moved to the wilds of South London.
It's true. It's treating me very well, though, I have to say.
Good. Well done, you. You're sort of forging a path down in sort of South London. So welcome back. It's great to have you. And I mean that very seriously. And you have a fantastic website, don't you, which is all about mental wellness. And we were just talking about mental wellness just before we started. And I'm intrigued by the terms people use in this field. And so I'm sort of interested why mental wellness as opposed to mental health or something else. What sort of attracts you to that term?
Yeah, for me, as we mentioned briefly, I love the term mental wellness because it's quite different from the term mental illness. Yeah. And it's something that I feel we can all embrace in a much more long-term way, as opposed to mental health or mental problems, which are something we kind of want to shrink away from. As you mentioned, I have a website and a platform that's growing along with the community and social media, all under the name Helping Yourself, which is really an all-encompassing platform that brings together people, their personal stories, professionals and their advice, and lots of different resources and next steps. And that covers loads of different things, from our relationship to food, to symptoms like not being able to sleep, to types of therapy, to much more serious things like if people need urgent help. And I'm really passionate about how we can bring all those together under the kind of tagline that there's loads of ways to feel better. So for me, mental wellness is really about feeling really good in your life. And there's lots of times all of us have probably experienced suffering, and there is a way out. And it might not necessarily be the first thing you try, but there's loads of different things out there. So I'm really interested in bringing those things together.
And there's a lot of themes you brought up there, like help seeking and don't give up, etc. I'm interested in how you got into this area. What sort of brought you into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we only have an hour, so I won't go into too much detail. But like many other people, I really struggled with anxiety, with depression, with different challenges throughout my teenage years and through college and as a young professional. And it took a lot of different things to help me. I tried taking antidepressants, they didn't work for me. I tried CBT, that didn't work for me. I tried talking therapies, some of that worked, some of that didn't. I've tried, relationship counseling and a bunch of different things. And I really have become fascinated in that process about what does work and what doesn't work. And at times when I was struggling, I was wishing that there might be better resource out there, that, you know, if a tough evening where I'm feeling really anxious, I might not have an appointment for a couple of weeks. Was there a middle ground or something to kind of feel like you're connected to your road to recovery, but without, you know, certainly without being in hospital or anything like that. And now there's so much out there, books, podcasts, there's amazing documentaries and resources that you can take in quite a healthy way. But I don't think there's a really good platform bringing them together yet. So that's what I'm aiming for. Did
you grow up as an anxious little girl? Was that the sort of history in your background, or was it sort of later, a bit later? I mean, you said when you were a young professional, as far as I'm concerned, you still are a young professional, because I'm an old bloke.
The eye cream is working now. Yeah, a very interesting question. And I'd say a lot of people might identify with this. I'd say a bit of everything. I think that at times I describe myself as high functioning, but also really struggling with my mental health. So to a lot of people, I presented very well. I was, you know, in school every day. I was social. A lot of the kind of key indicators that people might measure a functional human against. But in the background or behind the scenes, or the people very close to me knew that I was really struggling, or I might be doing okay, but had struggled in the past, and those struggles were coming up again. So I was kind of a mix. I had, you know, in lots of ways, incredibly happy memories, and so lucky to, you know, have had, you know, a safe childhood and lots of things like that. But in other ways, absolutely, I really struggle with my mental health from a young age. I didn't have great coping skills. They talk about now that there's like a resilience gap in people's knowledge and understanding and learning. And I do think that's true. And there was definitely more room for education in how I could cope and how I could handle life's challenges and struggles. Even just being in the school system as a creative person and not feeling totally at home there. So, yeah.
Were you talking to people about what was going on? Did you know that there was an issue, or was it just, this is my normal, this is the way I am?
Yeah, you know what, Noel? Interesting to praise you. I remember I didn't really know what it was, but I certainly had feeling discomfort and kind of unhappy feelings sometimes, which now I would regularly experience overwhelm. Yeah. But one time I was in the kitchen and there was a radio show talking about children and mental health and depression and how to help young people who are struggling. And a little light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, oh yeah, this is a little extra something that is going on for me. It's not just a day to day, and then I suddenly felt really stressed out about this. This has been building up, and I was struggling a bit, and then something
so that made you think, oh, actually, there is something weird going on.
Exactly, right. Which just shows how important these types of conversations, podcasts, and keeping these conversations going in the public domain are so important, because there's definitely people out there, and I'm so fascinated by finding that middle ground between what's functional person who's just having a bad day versus someone who does need help, and how we can all keep an eye out for ourselves in that way.
And tell me if I'm treading on ground I shouldn't do, but I'm really interested.
I'll tell you.
Good. And I really mean that, because I think that it's really important people have comfortable and safe boundaries of their own around these issues. I'm really not a sort of Jeremy Kyle type, you know, where we get people and say, rip open your guns. I find all that stuff really horrible, actually.
It can be a lot, can't it? Yeah. I've heard the term, if you'll excuse the bad language, pain porn. So there's a balance to be struck, but also that's what's really important about all the work we do, you know, finding a way to have open conversations.
I see it. I mean,
with boundaries.
What I encourage people to do is talk about what they have definitely processed.
Yeah.
And when we process something, when we come through something to the solution, when we're reflecting upon those experiences when we were not in the solution, we reflect on them in a way that isn't activating.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
And such a good point.
But when we are in the issue still, we're too raw and open, I think, and it's not safe and held. And very little learning happens in that space.
I couldn't agree
If it's a
more.
public space, it's not safe and without
Absolutely.
safety. But what
And
I'm interested in is this word safety, because you
mm,
used it to describe your childhood, and I take that on board that it was safe. But it's
yeah,
really interesting because I think we assume that if somebody has, shall we call it psychological distress of some
yeah,
sort? Is that
absolutely.
okay? That they must have had a difficult childhood. But I know that's not true. And I'm really intrigued by the fact that, you said your childhood was safe, yet still these things were going on. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
Yeah, absolutely. Very true.
Right. And so there is, I think, a strong argument for that. There is something about the world we live in that is quite difficult.
It's true. And everyone's issues do matter and they are valid, even if in comparison to some of the really terrible things and terrifying things that might be happening in the world news, they can seem on a much smaller scale, but actually it is really important that we validate our feelings and that we take the time to process, as you said.
Yeah, I guess I'm making a point here, which is I think that psychological thinking has been dominated by a very old model, which is it's all about mummy and daddy and the family.
Mm.
And it just isn't about that for the vast majority of people. But it is about environmental. I don't mean environmental in the sense of
The trees.
the tree. I mean the world that we in, the environment, the social, political, cultural, economic environment that we're in has either positive or negative impacts upon us. And there's a saying, isn't there, that says don't diagnose yourself with anxiety and depression unless you figured out whether or not you're just surrounded by idiots.
It's so true. And
You know what I mean?
It's interesting. Even now, I don't know if you've heard this phrase that comes up in social media. People talk about people having these conversations and it's trauma dumping. So they're maybe trying to bond, but it's unprocessed and it's raw and it's not positive or constructive. And similarly, trauma bonding. So you meet someone else, you have this conversation, and that can actually create quite a negative environment or a place where you might be processing something, but in a way that isn't healthy. So it is actually a really important
I
conversation.
explain it to people is there's a big difference between intimacy and intensity.
Okay, tell me about that, please.
Well, intimacy is something very gentle,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't involve deep diving into stuff. And most people who have strong intimacy often don't go into deep stuff unless they are necessary. But some people, particularly if they've had quite difficult experiences in life, are stuck in that intense experience and the need to have that intense experience. And they sort of hijack people. They take hostages in their relationships. It's not a relationship. It's a sort of more of a hostage taking process.
So interesting. And of course, as we all maybe take care of ourselves and heal, we might learn how to communicate about our challenges in a way that's really beneficial, as opposed to something that could damage a relationship. So that's very interesting. I hadn't heard that before. I think
this whole area of trauma bonding is very interesting in terms of particularly people who've had quite adverse life experiences, that they get maybe caught. I've done it myself, having had a very sort of disturbing childhood. I recreated that intensity and that drama and that trauma in many future relationships. It took a long time to, and I think one of the things that enlightened me where I am at the moment was my boy who is 12 I love deeply like nothing else ever, but I wouldn't dream of telling him sort of dramatic
such
and
an interesting comparison.
Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't dream of doing that, but there's no sense in which our love is anything other than
less
profoundly strong. One of the strongest experiences I've ever had, but it does definitely not involve anything dark. It's sort of quite the opposite.
Isn't that fascinating?
I think it's amazing stuff, isn't it? Which is how I guess I relate to this notion of mental wellness.
Absolutely. And in fact, I just was mentioning to you before the show that the latest statistics in the UK show that about 70% of cases of PTSD are undiagnosed. So a lot of people are carrying around stuff that they haven't processed, and they're not really equipped with the tools. So having those conversations, like you say, treading those fine lines is incredibly important.
Yeah. And coming back to this idea about information, because you raised the subject of when you were younger, you heard a radio show that made you think, there is something going on for me. And there is something happening that maybe sort of I can get some help with. What was that that childhood experience? And I don't know what age you were. Did you start to get help at that point, or was it a bit later on that you started to think, right, I'm going to try and get some help? What was the journey into that for you?
I think it was a lot later on, unfortunately. My hope is now that times have really changed. But, when I was growing up, I started secondary school in 2004. The word anxiety was not a part of common rhetoric. It was not in our vernacular. So, no, before that, there definitely wasn't an easy conversation I knew how to have about finding some extra help or the type of support I wanted to request or anything like that. But I think over time as a teenager, it became obvious that I was struggling more. I think functioning well in school, there was some of my functionality dropped off a bit of a cliff, and it became quite obvious that I needed some help. And whether it was a school counselor or an outside counselor or a whole variety of help. And at the very start, I'll be honest, Neil, it opened a Pandora's box, because I didn't have the words, but I knew the struggle. And so opening that up, it was a whole learning process. It wasn't like a lot of that information was out there and I was now pulling it together to describe my experience. At that time, we weren't taught any of these things. So I was learning and then going, oh yeah, that rings a bell, that rings a bell, that rings a bell, which is probably the case for a lot of people. But what's amazing now with the internet and everything is that these words and this type of language and help is becoming part of our day-to-day understanding of life, I hope.
What was the first? Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it is sort of, there's a lot more information out there, and you're part of that. So what was the first step for you? Was it to go and see a counsellor, or was it to talk to your doctor? I mean, what was the first step that you took?
Yeah, it was a school counsellor. I think I had a teacher. There was some different conversations about, me maybe not being 100%.
And was that because your performance dropped off?
Help? Yeah, I think
performance dropped off, and the teachers went, "Oh, there must be something wrong with Georgie."
Or yeah, or what's going on, or is she all right, or something like that. And maybe it was slightly obvious that I wasn't. I don't recall being, more withdrawn or anything. But thankfully, sometimes it only takes one really caring person with their eyes open to notice something and have that conversation, which is so important for anyone to do, to, find the words to say, are you okay? Could we have a chat? I'm not sure if you are. And I had a couple of those kind of conversations. Luckily, spoke to a school counsellor, and that led to a recommendation of an outside counsellor, and that led to different types of help and trying to see what was going on and what could work, which took time, but it definitely got the ball rolling, which was kind of the most important step.
I mean, which again, I think it's a really important experience, because I think it's very common for a lot of people that the first time they go and see somebody to ask for help, it may not work.
I couldn't agree more. And trying to not lose hope. Like at that time, I really wasn't feeling very hopeful. I wasn't feeling very positive. I was struggling to see things in a positive light. And so I had this experience where it felt like I would expend some of the hope I had, that maybe this would help. And then when it didn't, it was quite hurtful, or it was really challenging. So then finding the strength to go, oh, well, now we'll try this thing and we'll see if it works. It sometimes felt disingenuous. So that's really what I'm so interested in now, is like trying to communicate that hope is actually endless, and it's not just the next professional that you talk to, but actually there's so much out there, but not that we can always see it.
Yeah. But what kept you going then, given that you were sort of disappointed and maybe a little bit knocked
Feeling
back?
disheartened. Yeah. What did keep me going? I don't know. Lots of different things, but one of the things that I used to do was I'd, stay up late at night. I didn't sleep well. I'd be having nightmares. I just wasn't having a good time. But I used to Google things like what's out there, and Google books, or buy a book on panic attacks, or look at some of the kind of medical cases that are out there of what different people were doing. I remember the New York Times used to do a regular article on new research that has come out of clinical trials. And so I was always really interested in that kind of whole world, larger world of options that are out there. Now that didn't always make me feel better, but that's kind of my hope with what I've started to develop, is that platform where there is other things out there that could give a sense of what's out there, but in a very monitored way.
Yeah. But you also mentioned a really interesting word. It's a word I'm very fascinated by, which was the word creative and creativity. And you've described yourself several times as being a very creative person. You work in the creative industries now. Tell me about that, what you mean firstly by that word, and then I'm going to come back and ask you how it relates into this continuous journey that you've been on towards your package of services for yourself that work with your mental wellness, which is what I advocate people do, because there is no one size fits all. Anybody who tells you one size fits all is lying to you.
Or if they find that winner. I haven't found it.
It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen.
No, we've got 7 billion people in the world. There's a lot of needs.
So tell me about being a creative person. When did you know you were a creative person, and what role has that played in your life?
Yeah, I think in some ways I probably always knew. My parents were both quite creative, so when I was a kid, we used to, go to a lot of museums or art shows and things like that. And my brother wasn't especially keen, but I tended to enjoy these things. I know my mom used to joke that I'd got one of these like kids cameras when I was like maybe 5 for a birthday, and instead of like taking photos of people, I took photos of the inside of the dishwasher and all sorts of little things in the kitchen that interested me. So I was always taking a different view, loved doing art and that kind of thing. We might have lost Noel for a moment, have we? We've got James in the background working away, thankfully.
Sorry, things have been freezing for me, Georgie.
Oh, well, I haven't been disconnected to you from you for too long, luckily.
Okay, great. So you're back with me. I'm just checking with James, who's freezing.
I can see he's coming online here, our savior.
So we're having quite significant right, it's me, James is telling me.
It's you, Noel. Well, I can hear you okay. Me. So hopefully we might be okay to continue.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry about that, folks, but this is in the nature of live shows,
real life.
So we were just talking about creativity. You noticed that you were creative from an early age.
Absolutely.
You were your parents engaged in, as a family, in the cultural industries in the broadest sense. So they took you both out. As kids, they took you out to see events. How did your creativity manifest at school? Were you involved in the arts at school as well?
I guess I must have been, like, when I was quite young. The only time I remember it being noticeable was more when I was a late teen, and at that in the UK, the A levels, in Ireland we call it the leaving cert. So that kind of older stage where other people have dropped art, and I kept going, and I did eventually keep going and go to like a portfolio course, like that we call here, like an art prep, and then do my degree in an art college, and continued on in fashion. So I think it was obvious, probably to most people, but I'm sure to your point, and I'm interested why you say the word creativity fascinates you. I think to your point, creativity isn't just the art, also it's the thought processes and having a slightly different view.
I would agree with you, and I'm interested in it because there is a belief around that creative types, creative people, particularly people who work in the arts, can be more prone to mental health problems than non-creative people. There's a myth around that. I actually think the opposite is true.
Really?
That, it's not necessarily that they're more prone. In fact, I find that creative people, and this is why I'm interested in your story, and I wondered whether you felt it was part of it. Creative people don't give up as easily.
So you think that they maybe have more resilience for?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. That's my experience. There was some research done on the link between mental illness and creativity, and whether you saw more mental illness within the creative industries. And the research, as I understand it, came to the conclusion that no, but what you do see is that certain elements, certain types of illnesses can exist in certain types of creative industries and not in others. So it's very difficult to survive in theatre, live theatre,
or to be a painter, or
if you're a depressive type who gives up every now and then, you can't make it in theatre, but you could be a writer, and that's okay. Or you could be a visual artist, and that's okay. And that's what the research showed, not there's a greater preponderance. But also the research went on to show that creative people tend to keep going through periods of illness much more, and will process it more effectively, and this is a really interesting thing for me, which is, and won't give up on trying to seek help, which is a significant part of your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess it's true that I had a beloved art teacher, Helen, and she would say creative people are never bored because they're always thinking about another project they might do, or what they might like to try, photos they want to take, or there's usually something of interest going on in the back of their mind, or something they've been thinking about, a new topic, a new book, something to research. And that's probably a little bit speaks to some of the benefits. At the same time, probably when I was in school, I did notice some of the challenges, because I think the cookie cutter of an education system with someone who's creative and maybe it doesn't suit, I think that can be a breeding ground for some of the challenges of mental wellness during the time of coming of age and trying to fit in. But yeah, I guess it's interesting. It's not to say that one is worse or better. Maybe it's just two different approaches.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm sending James the link because he's managed to drop out. So we're having one of those evenings.
It's a team effort. It's a team effort for the last live.
Sort of losing their internet and losing the plot at the same time.
Everyone's going to believe you. No one's going to think, oh, they actually pre-recorded it. No, this is what a live recording looks like.
Absolutely. So James is back with us. So there you go.
Savior.
And there's a couple of creative people managing to get through a bit of chaos. I suppose what it is I'm thinking about, and I think it's a central plank of some of the things that you're talking about, is that the continuing effort to just keep reaching out, just keep asking for help, and just try different things. And that's sort of, I think that's connected to creativity in the sense of I'm talking about my own background here in theatre. I used to be an actor and a director and so on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm sort of a long time ago, back in the days when pterodactyls still flew.
I'm sure that's why you're such a good communicator.
Sort of, yeah, maybe. Not this evening, though. But the some of the things that used to happen around sort of creativity was there were issues around. So, for example, I grew up in quite a challenging environment, but one of the things that I could do and always do well was get on stage and do my theatre. And I had that thing to do, which helped me in terms of, I mean, there are various ways it helped me, but it did certainly help in terms of self-esteem. It helped in terms of keeping me connected to people, which was very important.
Yeah.
And it helped in terms of, encouraging me to find different ways of thinking about things and different ways of experiencing things. And also things like getting a new perspective on issues, and so I think there were quite a lot of very useful skills that were involved in being involved in sort of creative industries and creative work and creative things at school, and particularly at school, I think, because it meant that I stayed part of groups.
Yeah.
And one of the big things, I think, and I wonder if this is part of your experience, is that when we have psychological distress, there is a tendency for us to isolate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, was that your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think in different ways that's manifested for me over times, whether it's been not expressing how I was feeling in more challenging ways, but even day to day now, as someone who's really done a lot of the work and continues to try and do the work, I can find that if I'm feeling particularly frustrated in those moments where I feel challenged or something's come up that I need to deal with and I'm trying to figure it out, just when it might be quite beneficial for me to reach out and ask for help, I can hesitate and go, oh, I'll just step away, and actually can see it getting worse and can see that instinct sometimes to isolate myself instead of reaching out. And I think it's a bit messed up that that's so natural to us as humans, considering that we're surrounded by people, and a lot of us have a lot of people now, whether it's our family or our chosen family, that love and support us and want to be there, but it's hard to ask for help.
It's and it never gets easier. That's the issue.
What? I'm hoping it gets easier.
No, it doesn't get easier.
I'm going to try.
What we do is,
I'll report back.
Yeah, we sort of develop techniques that mean that we come into contact with situations where we do ask for help. So I'll give you an example. It's like I've got a bunch of people who know me well, and they know when I'm in a good place and know when I'm in a bad place. So I remember I was chatting to a friend on the phone. I was in the gym on the running machine, and chatting to them, just catching up with them and stuff like that. Then I just got really annoyed with somebody else on another running machine. I got really angry with them, started having an argument with them. My mate said, "Noel, you've just started an argument with somebody for no reason. Do you think you might be struggling with your anxiety, Noel?" I went, "Oh, maybe I am." And I think that's really what happens in life.
And the healthy observation, placed it in a gentle way with humor.
Yeah, she wasn't so gentle. Less of the gentle. She was bludgeoning me with that insight, because I need a bludgeon. I don't need gentle, I promise you. But it's that sort of thing. And I think we begin to learn to organize our life in a way that it will be healthier for us and it will work for us. It's that type of approach. And I presume you're getting that type of experience yourself as well.
I think so. I do find, I don't know if you ever find this, that I think I've learned a lesson sometimes. I've come through it, I've processed it, I've read the book, I've listened to the podcast.
And then boom.
Same situation again. I read the book.
Repetition is very helpful, apparently.
Very helpful, apparently, yeah.
I hope it is, because I keep doing it myself.
I believe this is the human experience sometimes. It takes practice.
Let's get back into your story, into your narrative, and we'll keep going off on these tangents, and we'll keep losing.
You direct me.
whatever. But that's fine. So you start into the journey of understanding yourself. It's not particularly helpful, but you've started that path. You're at school. What was the next step for you? You go to university, or you go straight into work? What's the sort of next step in your journey?
Yeah. I went to university. I lived at home, and I attended university, which is very kind of standard in Ireland. I know in the UK it's more standard for people to move away to go to university. So I was living at home, still in my childhood bedroom, still, facing some of the same environment and the same people around me, but a totally new day-to-day experience with the university, which was massively beneficial and very happy, while I was also still dealing with a lot of the anxiety and the situations that really required professional help that I had been experiencing towards the end of secondary school. And that was really, really important for me to also see you could be really challenged and also really happy. And I think probably a lot of people find that. And it's true that sometimes going through treatment is very beneficial to be in a good place, as opposed to just going to it when you're in a crisis or you're in a really hard time, because it can be so vulnerable then, compared to when maybe you're feeling okay and you've got a bit more experience with boundaries or what you would like to explore, and then trying to find that experience and that health and healing process in a way that feels like really good to you. Like that's amazing. And that's why that kind of healthcare and mental health treatment is a real privilege.
Yeah. And so did you get further professional help while you were at university, or did you stumble along?
No, I kept going right the way through. I did years. So I had one psychotherapist in the end who was incredibly helpful to me after trying a couple of things like CBT, which was not the right thing for me at the time. And probably during that process I got worse. And then I had another psychotherapist who was incredibly helpful, and I did years of sessions with her weekly or bi-weekly. That was really beneficial, and I finished.
And what was that approach that was helpful for you, just out of interest?
Yeah, it was talking therapies. It's actually something I would love to learn more about, the different types of therapies, like humanists, or the different approaches that psychotherapists have. You probably know a lot more about this than I do, but it was a talking psychotherapy, and it involved a lot of analysis of everything that was going on, including the day-to-day and the childhood and I don't know what this is, but it feels like a shape or a color or a tension in my body or an overwhelm when I go to explain how I'm feeling or need to ask for something in day-to-day life, and unpacking all of those things that were going on. And when I came out of it, I couldn't believe how well I was. That also probably really sparked an interest in mental wellness for me, because I was so much better coming out of it than I expected it to be. I hadn't just come back to a baseline or what I thought was, much more functional. I really came out of it feeling very strong, feeling like nothing could knock me down, and that there really wasn't anything that I couldn't stand back up from again after I got knocked down, which that feeling doesn't always last. And over time I needed to, incorporate more practices like meditation. I went back to therapy for a while, years later. So it's been a whole process of incorporating different things. But yeah, straight through university, I was doing it all the time, which was really, really an important step. And it really allowed me to get to know myself in a way that I wouldn't have got to at all, especially considering the kind of social dynamics that happen at university.
Yeah, which would be horrific for somebody with anxiety.
Absolutely.
That's the worst place to be.
And people have such different experiences.
Anxiety,
a lot of people move away to go to university, and that's the first real experience of isolation or first experience of mental health challenge. In some ways, I was lucky. I went in feeling challenged, so I was already working on my coping skills for what might be thrown at me. Whereas, you know, everyone has these things at different times. I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I kind of feel it's likely most people will experience some mental wellness challenges over the course of their life.
Oh, without saying,
Yeah.
everybody, if you don't, you're not alive.
Yeah. And they say, I think someone's mental health will be seriously affected in 1 in 5 people. So that's usually someone in every family or group
The figures
of
I know are
friends.
4 out of 5.
4 out of 5. Wow.
If you look over
There
a
you go.
lifetime, mental health,
Yeah.
psychological distress, if you look over a lifetime of a population, psychological distress is the norm at some
Yeah.
point. It's not an unusual thing. That's why sort of in my profession now, we're very much about teaching people the skills of identifying and managing psychological distress and moving on from it, and just assuming it's going to happen because it will. And it's you know, the sort of evidence is really clear. And it's really clear the earlier you get help, the better. I'm intrigued as well by the fact that you spent quite a long time with somebody, and I'd like to reflect upon that, because I think again, it's not that long term is better than short term, or short term is better than long term. That's not the bit I'm talking about. And it's not that we have to know whether the modalities, what we call them, the different types, we call them modalities, is evidence-based or not evidence-based. There is a thing that goes on, which I think is really intriguing, and which you've sort of highlighted without using the words I would use, but it's this, the importance of a therapeutic relationship. So developing a relationship over time with somebody where you begin to build confidence in their capacity to help and understand you as a unique individual. That's how it feels.
Absolutely. Right? And that's so important. And as I mentioned to you before, I think for me, that's sometimes something that can be missing in some people's experiences. And what I would love to see in the future, and what I've tried to create a little bit in my own life, is having a long-term relationship with someone, so that even if you stop therapy, a year later you can go for a meeting and check in, or 2 months later, or every second year, even just to have a once off and have a mental health check-in. We have checkups for other parts of our health all the time. And, you know, we have teeth, we go to the dentist, we brush our teeth regularly, we keep an eye on them. We have mental health. We know it's most likely it's going to be challenged at some stage. Keeping an eye on it is that
sort of family
important.
Doctor model, the GP model, somebody you know for many years, I think is a really intriguing model. There's also that thing, and the science behind this is quite clear, that it's about personality growth and development. And I'm a real fan of this notion that we allow our personality to grow in healthy ways, and that we set ourselves tasks. And one of those tasks, I think, can happen within therapeutic relationships. And what happens is what the frontal lobes of that bit of the brain are put into what's called a strange situation.
Okay.
And then it has to adapt. And the way it works is, if you've got a trusting relationship with somebody, and let's call them a therapist, let's call them Georgie, doesn't matter. You've got a trusting relationship with that person, who then gives you a new insight into an age-old problem that you've had. And if the bond between you and that trusted person is strong enough, you will allow yourself to feel what's called a form of cognitive distress or psychological distress. Cognitive dissonance is what the word is.
I've heard that term, but I haven't had. I wasn't clear.
It's a strange emotional feeling, psychological feeling that we get, which suggests
almost like an exposure therapy.
Yeah, and we sort of tolerate the discomfort of it because we trust the person. What's actually happening is new pathways are growing, our personality is growing. And that's really the science behind this whole thing of the therapeutic relationship. But the government health warning that comes with it is that feeling can happen with a charlatan as much as it can with someone before you. So you really have to be sort of careful about that, which is why I think it's really important when you engage in those types of relationships. make sure that you're choosing somebody who's appropriately qualified and also is accountable. So that if
Absolutely.
something goes wrong, they'll be punished because that's the way it should be, right? Do you know what I mean?
They're accountable to a system and a framework of professional development.
Yeah, well,
I
look,
see your point.
I'm a regulated professional. There's a government
Absolutely.
body that gives me a license, and if I mess up, they protect the public. That's it.
Yeah. And what
And
other
that level of
tasks would you
accountability.
describe?
Sorry, go on, Georgie.
I was interested when you mentioned the different tasks that will develop your personality and help you grow. Is there any other tasks in that kind of body of development you could describe?
There's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, physical movement is the big thing our brain is designed to do. But essentially, it's about understanding that the brain is in different bits. And the bit that is malleable or plastic is the term, neuroplastic, is these frontal lobes up here. And that's all about personality. That's all about higher functioning. So anything to do with interpersonal relationships, that's where it happens. And the way I liken it is like this. We know this for a fact now, that the more diverse our social groups and the closer we are to those diverse groups, the healthier we'll be. That's it. It's one of the easiest ways into health and well-being is to have a really diverse, warm, loving social group around you.
Yeah.
And it's like this. The image I give people is if you go to the gym, right, and you exercise your right arm like this, and that's all you ever do, and you keep increasing the weight on that, okay, you're going to have a nice big right arm, but you're not going to have a healthy body.
Yeah.
You're just not. Whereas if you do whole body exercises, then you're going to have a healthy body. And it's the same with your mind. You need to have a whole mind. And the way we get that is through a complex, warm, loving social network around us.
And taking in other perspectives.
Absolutely. And particularly ones that we dislike. That's the best way to grow your personality.
Painful as it might be.
No, it's the absolute truth. It's the absolute
But it's like
truth.
you said, right? Tolerating someone else's opinion and the discomfort because you have a trust in that relationship.
That's literally, or not even if you have a trust, but you know cognitively, and we have this great ability to be self-aware. We can make decisions and ignore the signals that say it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But we can choose to make decisions. One of the core psychological healthy skills. Coming back to you rather than me and my various soapboxes. So you get this therapeutic relationship, let's call it that, for want of a better term, which is gentle and compassionate enough so that you don't notice you're changing. But then when you look back, you go, bloody hell, I've changed. And that's lovely when you meet somebody like that. To be honest, it's real gold dust. People like that are real absolute gold, because they are transformative. It's alchemical type of stuff. But you also start exploring things outside of, say, talking therapies. And what were the sorts of things that you began to explore that you're now an advocate of as well? The sort of things that worked for you?
Yeah, interesting. I have a real interest in this. I advocate for what works for me. So I've explored loads of different things, and it started with just breathing and doing certain breathing exercises that I used to do in therapy to just check in with myself. And then I've tried loads of different things, from interesting and highly unusual courses in family constellations to daily meditation practices that can be done for free with YouTube, or I love Headspace, the app. Journaling. I have a women's circle that do meditation. I think we have a mutual friend, Jen, who who I stay in touch with, who's a wonderful yoga teacher, and I've got a great community of women who I've done energy healing. I've done loads of different things that are out there. And for me, what's kind of quite beneficial the day to day is doing meditation. I don't get to it every day. There's been times when I've been very committed to doing it every day, but most days, and often doing a bit of journaling in the morning to clear my head and start the day intentionally. Now, the research shows that I think for 69% of people, meditation is really beneficial. For 30% of people, it's just doesn't work for them. So trying it isn't useful. And for 1% of people, it's not good. It lets them ruminate on negative thoughts. It's not constructive. So I'm a big advocate, as we've made the point numerous times now, of finding what works for you. But those are some of the things that work for me. And I'm always reading books or podcasts or trying out new kind of interesting conversations that are happening in the world about mental wellness and what's beneficial.
But tell me what it was then that made you go, right, I need to start sharing this with other people, and I need to start creating the resources that I now have for people. What was the motivation for that? When did that start?
Interesting. Well, I think I did a lot of stuff without gathering any of the information. And I used to look back and think, God, I remember you used to know this really handy breathing technique that helps you get to sleep when you can't sleep. And I've forgotten it now. And I wish I wrote it down somewhere, very helpful. And I could text it to my friend who's struggling with insomnia, because it was really useful. I used to use it in college, and now I've forgotten it. And there was loads of times that I didn't do it. But I think during COVID, especially, I used to have some notebooks or different places that I'd written things down. And during COVID is when I started to really think about putting it all together. I had some time. I was in between jobs. I had lived in New York and I moved back, and I had a bit of a gap. And that's when I really started exploring what it would look like to really make this. And I looked back through, I had been living in the States, and I was back at home in my parents' house, and I found old notebooks, like from years and years, going back 5 or 10 years, where I'd made notes when I used to look up these things when I was feeling challenging. I kept journals for a long time. So starting to think about how there was actually a lot of gold dust information that I had found that I hadn't recorded, or it would have been really great to keep put together. Or again, some things I did that weren't amazing, but some things I did that were amazing. Like I did one time this 1-day course or half a day on rebuilding your relationship with food and looking at how anxiety or different things can all impact that. Incredible, by a person, Neve Orbinski, who is a yoga teacher, a trained psychologist, and a nutritionist, and has brought together a lot of her experience about mind, body, food and nutrition connection, and how all those things can manifest. And it was transformative, but in half a day. So she now contributes to the website, and we've put up some new kind of areas of focus for us on the relationship to food and intuitive eating. And it's not to, give guidelines to anyone, but just to show some of the different research that's out there is fascinating, and then can be used to kind of inform treatments or people's road to recovery if they are suffering from a kind of labeled food issue, such as body dysmorphia or anorexia, et cetera, et cetera.
So you've mentioned your website quite a few times, but tell us the link for it. Where is this website?
Yeah, that's at helpingyourself.co.uk. And I think the same on Facebook. It's helpingyourself.co.uk, easy to find. And on Instagram, it's just helping yourself, and there's an underscore at the end. But I'm sure James, our tech wizard, will have linked everything here. Which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, but it's well worth saying. And when did you set that website up?
I think at the start of COVID, so 2020.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
That's when it first began. And it was also when I was, finding that period of time incredibly stressful, and starting to think about some of those coping mechanisms. So yeah, it's been going
and
a while.
So is that the main sort of portal sort of help that you offer to people? Have you got books out as well? You've got Facebook. What else is sort of out there that you're sort of offering to people?
Yeah, so we're looking at developing the offering. The hope is in the future is that there's an online portal where people can log in and gather all sorts of things. Looking at developing courses. We've just set up at the very beginning of an online store, so that brings together a lot of great wellness products, and even like boxes where you can put together, if you know someone who's maybe experiencing grief, putting together a bunch of products that can be put together as a gift, those kind of things, just creating a really holistic supportive system. We're also looking at setting up a Patreon. So there's loads of exciting things coming down the line. And again, right from the negative all the way to the positive, like incorporating life coaching and really, really constructive long-term kind of stepping stones for people to take their life right to where they really want it to be.
I mean, I find this whole area quite fascinating, that, you know, the sort of field, as it were, has gone from, if you like, the mental illness professional field, which you accessed via doctors and serious people and
pamphlets with someone's head in their hands.
That's right. To where we are today, which is that, you know, there's a huge plethora of resources out there, but there's also a lot of which are rubbish. But, you know,
well, that's why you need a tried, tested, recommended.
That's right.
That professional body, but that it's feel good. Isn't that your point?
Well, I mean, I think that it's become, and it's inevitable, this, and I think it is an issue, and I think it is useful to think about. It's become a field in which now people can earn a living, make money, set up a career, and that's a good thing, to be honest. I think that's if it suggests to me that it is embedding and becoming real, and it's becoming a sort of psychological wellness industry. And what's exciting for me as somebody, because I've been sort of in this game 30 years now.
Yeah, and you must have seen a lot of different patients and a whole variety of
but sort of, it's also seeing the field change quite significantly from quite a grim, sort of serious place full of people with no
devastating
social. I know, I have to tell you this story. This is the God's honest truth.
Okay, go.
I walked into a clinical group up in Scotland, and a very serious psychotherapist. And I walked in, me being me, I thought I'd make a quip, because I quite like quips. And I went, is this the group of people that have no social skills? Just trying to tease people.
How did that go down?
You know, like, it was, if looks could kill, I would still be, to be honest. But actually, I mean, you're laughing your head off. If I walked into a room with you and other people like yourself, you would find that hilarious, right?
Yeah.
Because you have.
Because you're a comic genius.
No, not because I'm a comic genius, but because you have social skills, and it's amusing. And also because I think the field has changed from that grim, dark place that I started into a much lighter, much more healthy, interesting, fun, irreverent space, and all of those things. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, that stuff, because I think one of the fundamental problems that mental health professionals have is misunderstanding wellness for the absence of illness. It's not. Wellness is something much more positive that one acquires through actually doing things in the world that make you feel good.
Absolutely. And they can coexist. And mental wellness isn't also the absence of amazing clinical professional help.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. And, you know, ideally, clinical interventions help people who can't get to the wellness because the symptoms they have obstruct the capacity to do that.
Absolutely.
And so you help them get around it in some way.
Yeah.
But the wellness field, I think, is really, it's fascinating. I've loved to see it grow, because I you know, health and well-being is where we would like to be. And health and well-being is something you can have even with a long-term mental illness. It is definitely something you can have, you know. And it's also, I'm really interested in your story about there were lots of things that were functional in your life, even during the very
darkest times.
There were still functional things going on, and that is really important. I think that sort of we hold on to that vision. Listen, we have come to the end of the hour, and I know you didn't think we would make it. Everybody we'll never make it to the end, but we do. The show sort of does fill time. It's been brilliant to have you back, and also been brilliant to have you as probably the final live guest, and it definitely was a live show because all three of us
no
our
one will have any
internet
doubts.
crashed at sort of one point or another, so there you go. It's a really interesting experience to round off that series of live events. But folks, the Wellbeing Show is still here. We'll be back next week. I've already recorded that show, so it will be beamed out at the same time. So tune in next week at 9 p.m. UK time. And so it will still keep going, and we're still available. I'm available. You can get hold of me through Facebook, through LinkedIn, through YouTube, or you can email me, noel@noelmcdermott.net, or you can use the phone number I gave out. So it'd be lovely to hear you all. And I'm always looking for guests, Georgie. Always looking for people to chat to. So if you know other folks, send them my way.
I'm sure. I'll be the one calling.
You stay there for now. I'm going to say goodbye to people and encourage you to come back and watch the show next week. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye.
Thank you.